Have you ever wondered, could the very people entrusted to protect technology become the ones who betray it? One quiet evening in a small town in Virginia, everything changed with one critical mistake. Grace Lewis, an ordinary woman, was pulled over for a crime she didn't commit. But what the officers didn't know was that she wasn't who they thought she was. Was this just a routine stop? Or had something far more sinister already been set in motion? Don't miss this story, because what you see isn't always what you think. To uncover the truth in this battle between justice and deception, subscribe and join me as we dive into the secrets hidden beneath the surface. A night that changed everything. Grace Lewis drove through the quiet streets of Arlington, Virginia, just past midnight, the stillness of the night settling into every corner. But something felt off, like a storm waiting to break. She had just completed a classified mission. The information had been delivered, the message secured, and now all she had to do was get home. She allowed herself a small smile, knowing that her work had helped protect everything she held dear. But no one knew that within seconds, her world would be turned upside down. The red and blue lights flared behind her, flashing in her rearview mirror. A police siren. Her heart jolted for just a moment. She had just crossed an intersection. Nothing out of the ordinary. Yet now the silence was shattered by the sharp wail of the patrol car. Her pulse quickened, but she wasn't afraid. Grace had been trained for moments like this. She kept her hands steady on the wheel, breathing evenly. Everything was under control. Or so she thought. As the patrol car came to a stop behind her, Grace didn't panic. She did exactly what she had been taught. Stay calm, prepare her documents, and wait. But what she hadn't expected was the look in the officer's eyes. A look that made the air grow heavy. A look that told her something wasn't right. A setup in motion. The slow, deliberate creak of the police car door opening sent a chill through her. As the officers stepped out, Carter and Sullivan, their demeanor was unsettling. They weren't just here for a traffic stop. Grace could feel it in the way they watched her, like they were waiting for something. A mistake, a slip-up, a reason. Something was very wrong. Carter was the first to speak. His voice was cold, calculated. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" His eyes locked onto hers, unwavering. The way he asked it, like he already knew the answer. But he didn't, and that's what made her uneasy. Grace stayed composed, her voice steady. She handed over her driver's license. Everything was in order. But the moment Carter's flashlight illuminated her ID, his expression shifted. A pause, a longer than necessary examination of her face, a calculated glance back at her documents. He was looking for something, searching for a flaw, a discrepancy, a reason to escalate. Then his voice dropped. "We have reason to believe you're carrying illegal substances." The word struck like a gut punch. For a moment, Grace almost laughed. Drugs? What kind of setup was this? Her mind raced. She had never been involved in anything criminal. She had taken every precaution, yet here she was, being accused of something she had never done. Then the realization hit. This wasn't just an accident. This was planned. The drugs were already in the car. Somehow, someone had planted them, and Carter and Sullivan knew exactly what they were looking for. A dangerous game. Grace took a slow, controlled breath. This wasn't panic. This was calculated entrapment. She had to think carefully. "I don't have anything illegal in my car," she said, her voice unwavering. Her eyes stayed locked on Carter's. For a brief second, he hesitated. She saw it, the flicker of doubt. But it wasn't enough. As if on cue, Sullivan reached for the door. "Step out of the vehicle." A cold, sharp click echoed in the night. Handcuffs, the weight of metal locked around her wrists. A warning, a trap closing in. She was being framed. And now the question wasn't just how to prove her innocence. It was, why? Why her? Why now? And who was really pulling the strings? The battle was just beginning. As she stepped out, her hands restrained, Grace knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. As the glow of the patrol car's headlights illuminated Grace's face, a deep sense of unease stirred within her. She had been trained to detect danger instantly, But not like this. Officers Carter and Sullivan weren't just ordinary cops. Their demeanor was too controlled, too calculated. They weren't looking at her like she was just another traffic stop. They were waiting, watching, like they already knew what they were going to find. A trap in motion, Grace locked eyes with Carter, keeping her expression unreadable. In the heavy silence between them, she realized everything had been set up in advance, a carefully laid out trap, but she refused to react. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing even a flicker of hesitation. She wouldn't let them see the truth lurking behind her calm exterior. She needed to stay composed, because one wrong move and everything could fall apart. The moment of exposure. Carter's voice was controlled, but his words carried a hidden sharpness. "Step out of the vehicle. Open the trunk." Grace knew what was coming. The moment the trunk opened, the game was set. Inside, neatly placed where it hadn't been before, a bag of unmarked narcotics, no labels, no traceable origin, nothing to prove it belonged to her. But that was the point. This was never about evidence. It was about perception, about making sure she looked guilty enough. A sharp wave of realization surged through her. But it wasn't fear, not panic, just clarity. She had seen traps before, but she had never been the target of one. The strength of silence. Grace let out a slow, measured breath. She wasn't a woman who broke easily. If they expected her to panic, to beg, to plead, they had chosen the wrong person. Instead, she smiled. Just slightly, not out of amusement, not out of defiance, but because she understood something they didn't. They thought they had control, but they had underestimated her, and she never played a game without knowing how to win. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice smooth and unwavering. Carter's expression barely shifted, but she caught the flicker of frustration. They wanted resistance. They wanted her to fight, to give them a reason. But she wouldn't. A battle of control. Grace stood tall, her gaze steady as she faced the two officers. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought she was trapped. But Grace Lewis was never trapped. Not in situations like this. Not against people like them. She could feel their confidence faltering. Not because they had messed up, but because she wasn't reacting the way they expected. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't angry. She was watching them, studying them the way they had studied her. And for the first time, they hesitated. A subtle shift. The moment was small, almost imperceptible, but Grace saw it. A glance exchanged between them, the subtle way Carter adjusted his stance. They were waiting for her to break, but Grace didn't break. She had spent years training for situations like this. She had learned how to read people, how to dismantle their expectations, how to survive when the odds were against her. And right now she knew one thing. They weren't as sure as they had been 5 minutes ago. A game they couldn't win. Carter's voice hardened. "You're under arrest." Cold metal snapped around her wrists. The sharp click of the handcuffs was meant to be a warning, a message. But Grace didn't flinch. She allowed them to restrain her, let them think they had won. But inside, she knew better. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Lucas and Samuel stood there, their eyes filled with smug confidence, believing they had complete control over the situation. They pressed Grace with sharp questions, their voices laced with authority, waiting, hoping for a reaction. But Grace didn't flinch. Her eyes remained cold, sharp, focused on only one thing: the mission. Their threats, their arrogance, the false sense of power they carried, none of it mattered. She had faced worse than this. She had survived far more dangerous games, and now she was playing to win. Unshakable resolve. The tension throbbed in the air like an electric current. Grace was no stranger to this feeling. She had lived in it, breathed it, mastered it. But this wasn't a simple interrogation. She could sense their conviction. These two truly believed they had her, a perfect trap, a flawless takedown. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Instead of fear, instead of anger, Grace smiled, a small, knowing smile, because every move she made now was leading to the truth, even if she had to risk everything. Every insult they threw at her, Every accusation meant to break her only made her stronger. Lucas and Samuel thought they had control, but they were walking straight into a trap of their own making. They didn't realize that she had been ready for this moment, that this was never their game to control. The truth unfolds. Then in the heavy silence that followed another round of interrogation, everything shifted. The atmosphere in the room changed. Lucas and Samuel stood frozen, staring at her, the weight of her words finally sinking in. Because she had spoken the one truth they weren't prepared to hear. Grace Lewis was a CIA operative, and she had been playing them from the very beginning. Her revelation hit them like a shockwave, ripping apart their confidence, exposing their arrogance. The lies they had built, the power they thought they held, all of it crumbled in an instant. Who is she? What has she done? Questions flooded their minds, but none of them had answers. They had walked into this believing they were the ones in control. Now they weren't even sure what they were dealing with. They had tried to use their authority to trap her, but they were the ones caught in her web. The power shift. The truth was undeniable now. Grace had orchestrated this from the start. Like a crashing wave, her revelation shattered the illusion they had wrapped themselves in. Lucas and Samuel stood still, unable to process the reality of what had just happened. The suffocating pressure of their mistake filled the room. They had never considered the possibility that the woman they tried to frame was actually someone far more powerful than them. They had overestimated their authority and underestimated her. Their badges, their uniforms, the false sense of superiority they had clung to meant nothing now, because the moment they put those handcuffs on her, they had already lost. A reckoning they never saw coming. Grace stood her ground, calm, unshaken, unbreakable. Her voice was steady as she met their disbelieving stares. "You think you can manipulate the system?" she said, her words sharp as ice. "But now it's your turn to pay the price." She wasn't just facing them as a prisoner. She was standing as the one who had already won. The truth had been set in motion, and there was no stopping it now. Her words cut through them like a blade, stripping away the arrogance they had carried just moments ago. This moment, this exact moment, was what she had been waiting for. Everything had been carefully planned, every detail accounted for. And now, with just one move, the entire game had changed. Lucas and Samuel weren't the hunters anymore. They were the ones trapped. An inevitable collapse. The weight of their mistake bore down on them. The room that had once felt like their domain now felt like a cage. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking anymore. They were facing the consequences of their own arrogance. And Grace, she was simply waiting, because she knew this was far from over. But no matter what happened next, she had already won. The storm had arrived. Lucas and Samuel, two officers who once believed they were untouchable, now stood face to face with their inevitable downfall. When CIA and FBI agents stormed the scene, there was no warning, no chance to prepare. Everything they had built on greed, deception, and arrogance collapsed in an instant. Like a powerful strike to the gut, the truth hit them, fast and mercilessly. They had never imagined their careers would end like this. But the truth can't stay buried forever. The price of betrayal. Lucas felt a sickening tension twist inside him as he watched federal agents enter, their gazes cold and unrelenting. But they weren't here to question. They were here to finish what had been started. His lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. Samuel, standing rigid beside him, clenched his fists, desperate to hold on to something that was already lost. But it was too late. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The truth had been exposed, and now there was no room left for excuses. The fall of the corrupt. For the first time, they weren't allies. Lucas and Samuel no longer looked at each other as partners. Not as officers, not as men in power. They were nothing more than criminals caught in the very trap they had set for others. In the presence of the CIA and FBI, they had no authority, no control, just fear. And a single haunting question lingered in their minds. How did it end like this? But there was no answer, because their empire of corruption had already crumbled. Grace walked free. Grace stepped forward, her movements steady, every step a victory. The world around her felt as if it had slowed, time stretching between what was ending and what was about to begin. The night was late, but there was no more tension, no more fear, no exhaustion, only a strange, powerful peace. She didn't look back at what she had left behind. There was no need to. The truth had already been laid bare. The corrupt had fallen, and now they would finally face the consequences of their actions. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile, not for recognition, not for reward, but because justice had been served. The corrupt officers could no longer hide behind their lies. Their deception had been erased from the system, breaking the cycle. The fear was gone, and in its place, hope. She had shattered the illusion of power they had created. Every action she had taken, no matter how subtle, had changed everything. Behind every scheme, behind every trap, she had been one step ahead. Lucas and Samuel had thought they were in control. They weren't. She had torn down the walls of corruption, and she had done it without ever compromising who she was. The fight wasn't over. The faces of the officers who had believed they could manipulate the system faded into the past. But Grace knew this wasn't the end. The battle wasn't finished. There would always be more to fight for, more to expose. But tonight, she had proven something undeniable. Justice isn't always immediate. Sometimes it happens in silence, in the right decisions made when no one is watching. And at that moment, Grace didn't need to say anything. She had done what was necessary. Her life, whether in the shadows or in the light, was a part of a much greater battle. She was a silent warrior. She needed no weapons, only integrity, and that was enough to change an entire system. The final victory, the night air whispered against her skin as she walked forward, her hair lifting in the wind. A soft glow from the streetlights reflected in her mirror, casting a scene as striking as a painting. She walked, fearless, unwavering, because justice had won. And that was everything. A mission that never ends. Grace continued her mission with sharp intelligence and unwavering determination. She understood that justice isn't just delivered through investigations or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it emerges through the choices people make every day. Tonight had proven that. Respect wasn't something that could be bought with money. Wealth could buy silence, but it could never buy true honor. The cost of corruption. She thought back to Lucas and Samuel, their downfall a result of their own choices. They had held power in their hands, believing they could do anything without consequence. But she had shown them the truth. Power means nothing without conscience. Truth and justice will always find a way to surface, no matter how deeply buried. It was a lesson she had learned through years of working in the shadows, among secrets and deception. And now she moved forward with renewed hope. A silent strength. Every step Grace took carried a quiet resolve. She wasn't just fighting for the innocent, she was fighting for herself. Deep inside, she knew that true respect and honor come from how we treat others, how we stand by our principles despite the challenges. That kind of integrity couldn't be bought. It couldn't be forced through authority. It had to be earned. And the only people who could truly recognize it were those who lived by it. Finding true allies. With each confrontation, with every question she asked, she built stronger connections, not just with the case, but with people who valued truth over comfort. The real allies in this fight weren't those who worked for a paycheck. They were the ones who stood for justice, even when it meant standing against those they cared for. Grace understood that wasn't always easy, but in moments like these, when faced with insurmountable challenges, she felt the undeniable strength of honor and truth. She needed no validation. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need anyone's approval, because Grace knew she had done the right thing, and that was enough. The respect she had earned wasn't from the loud voices of praise, but from the quiet acknowledgement of those who understood. That, to her, was the greatest reward of all. The fall of Lucas and Samuel, once confident, untouchable officers, now stood in chains of their own making, facing charges they couldn't deny. They were no longer the heroes they once believed themselves to be. Now they were convicted criminals. Men who had sold their souls to greed. The end of their empire. Their careers were in ruins. Everything they had built on corruption had turned to dust. They had once walked among their fellow officers as men of authority. Now they were nothing but a cautionary tale. The system they thought would always protect them had finally turned against them. The courtroom reckoning. When the judge delivered the final verdict, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. No more arguments, no more excuses. Their reign of power was over, and for the first time, they had to face the pain they had inflicted on others. The same money and influence they once relied on had become nothing but scars of their own downfall. The masks they had worn were gone. Now the world saw them for who they truly were. A punishment worse than prison. For Lucas and Samuel, the true punishment wasn't prison. It was the shame. Not only had they harmed innocent people, they had destroyed themselves. And the most agonizing realization, only truth could set them free. A bitter end. Their story didn't end in victory. It ended in regret, a fate they could never escape. But maybe in their fall from grace, a greater truth had been revealed. Power and money can never replace true honor. Men like Lucas and Samuel always pay the price, and now their corruption was no longer hidden. It was exposed for the world to see. After everything had ended, Grace sat alone in her quiet apartment, a feeling of peace washing over her like a gentle wave. Everything, the relentless tension, the dangerous deception, had finally come to a halt. She could hear the ticking of the clock, marking the seconds she had fought, endured, and pursued to bring the truth into the light. And now that truth had been revealed. Justice had won. Though the memories of the investigation still echoed in her mind, Grace felt an unexpected sense of peace. She had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered. Those who thought they could control everything now had to face the consequences of their actions. Justice, unpredictable as it may be, had prevailed, but her sense of hope didn't come from the punishment of the guilty. It came from knowing that she had stayed true to her principles. A new chapter. And even though this case had ended, Grace knew it was just one chapter in a much longer journey. Challenges would still come, but she also knew that no matter how formidable the enemies, she would never waver in her belief in justice. Justice had won, but more than that, her understanding, resilience, and dedication had only grown stronger. No need for recognition. She didn't seek glory or acknowledgement. What mattered most was the gratitude of those she had protected. That realization helped her understand that her work wasn't just about breaking corruption or bringing criminals to justice. It was about building a fairer world. Every time she took on a new investigation, she wasn't just fighting for a cause. She was carrying hope. She was carrying the belief that change was possible. The road ahead. With a quiet exhale, Grace rose from her desk, ready to move forward. Every step she took was steady, unwavering. And though she didn't know what awaited her next, she knew justice would always guide her way. In a world filled with shadows, Grace was a light that couldn't be extinguished, and she would keep moving forward, to wherever justice was needed. Because no matter the obstacles, justice would always prevail. Truth and honor will always be the strongest force of all. A lesson in strength and integrity. This story leaves behind an important lesson. The power of resilience and unwavering faith in justice. Grace, despite facing danger and deception, never lost sight of the values she fought to protect. The greatest lesson? Justice is never easy, but with determination, integrity, and a steadfast belief in what's right, it will always find a way to win. Because when the odds seem impossible, it only takes one person willing to stand up, to challenge the system, to restore balance. And no matter how powerful the corrupt may seem,